Hello everybody, my name is Brady and we are back with another React video, and today we're going to be checking out more Geography Now. So today we're going to be doing something a little bit different. I'm testing out something new in my setup. You probably won't notice the difference more or less, besides the fact that I'm going from full screen, hold on, to my little box in the corner. Ooh. Yeah, I don't usually do that. Little things. I'm just testing out some new stuff because I think we're heading towards kind of a new era on the channel, and I want to kind of start packaging things a little bit more differently. I kind of want to move towards streaming, but right now I'm not fully equipped to do so, but I'm going to test out new things that kind of shift my format towards something that is a little bit more streaming friendly. It's already pretty streaming friendly, so that's good. So today we're going to be doing Geography Now, but to kind of test this out to see how smoothly the current setup goes. This is more for me than it is for you. We're going to be doing two Geography Now videos. We're going to be doing Geography Now Armenia and Geography Now Australia. And I think after that, that just leaves one. Azerbaijan, I believe. There might be one other, but I'm pretty sure that's what it is. So if I start shifting the way I produce my content a little bit more towards this, I'm going to be able to kind of put one or two or three or maybe even more videos into a single video, and I'll be able to crank out more, and that'll be very advantageous when it comes to the Geography Now stuff. So hopefully everything is going smoothly. I'm monitoring it now. Everything seems to be in order. So if there are any gaffes, forgive me, because I'm still trying to figure YouTube out after all this time. All right. Thank you for tuning in and such, regardless. All right, let's get started with Geography Now Armenia first.
Oh my gosh, did you hear about Armenia and Greece? Okay, it's not like official and you didn't hear from me, but I think they're like dating now. Oh my god, they're like so perfect for each other. They're so cute. I hope they have babies. Yeah, 12-year-old girls watch this show too. I gotta appeal to that demographic.
It's time to learn geography.
No! Welcome to Armenia. Today's episode, I'm your host, Paul Barbato. Let's dissect the flag.
Yes. Just jumping straight into it, like that little bit of anti-humor, and then we jump straight into the flag. Actually, do I even know what the Armenian flag looks like?
The Armenian flag has three equally long wide bands of red, blue, and orange. The official definition of these colors, according to the Constitution of Armenia, are that the red signifies the Armenian highland, the continued struggle for survival, and the maintenance of the Christian faith.
Hey, what about the blood of the martyrs? I thought we had a theme here, that red equals blood of the martyrs, or something like that. That seemed to be a thing we were going with, but it seems like we're going. I guess you could make some sort of an abstract argument about like struggle, blood comes out during struggles.
Independence and freedom. The blue means the will of the people of the Armenians to live beneath peaceful skies, and the orange means the creative talent and hardworking nature of the people of Armenia. Some people will tell you that the red also represents the blood of the 1.5 million Armenians that were killed during the Armenian genocide in the early 20th century.
That's I didn't mean to do like a celebration thing, but blood. That's not something to celebrate, but like having the theme continue is something that I do appreciate.
And the orange is also the color of apricots, the national fruit. All right, now let's talk about the borders.
Oh, interesting. We haven't gotten into national fruit a whole lot yet.
Armenia is a landlocked nation located in the Caucasus region of Eurasia. By the way, it's pronounced Caucasus, not caucus. A caucus is when a ton of politicians make an excuse to get drunk. Bordered by 4 other countries, only 2 of which have open borders. We'll explain more about that in a bit. With the capital of Yerevan in the south-central region close to Mount Ararat in Turkey, which is the area that is disputably claimed to be the historical site that Noah's Ark landed on. The interesting thing is that Armenia actually has one enclave and one disputed nation locked within Azerbaijan.
Oh, this is already getting interesting. I didn't know there was like a place that they historically claimed Noah's Ark would have landed. I didn't know they actually had a place. I'd imagine they're. I mean, with how much people have been obsessed with relics throughout Christianity and having their own little claims of attachment to the religion, like, oh, okay, like, I'm not at all surprised. I'm sure it's not the only place that people claim Noah's Ark ended up.
Armenia actually has one enclave and one disputed nation locked within Azerbaijan. Azerbaijan, although considered an Armenian enclave, was actually taken over and controlled by Azerbaijan since 1992 as they expelled the Armenians living there. And on that note, Azerbaijan actually has 4 enclaves inside of Armenia: Okari Espikara, Yaradulu, Barkhudarli, and Karki. Now let's get back to the Nagorno-Karabakh Republic. This entire region is the center of so much controversy between Armenia and Azerbaijan. The population of this area is almost completely Armenian, and they have expressed their desire to either secede and become a part of Armenia or gain complete recognized statehood, even though Azerbaijan claims that they are still in their land. In the early 90s...
I suppose there is this common theme that I've been finding with a lot of these geography videos that cover topics in which places are inside of basically the wrong country. In the many cases of that, it seems like there develops this really complex identity that is firmly separate from the original country. And it seems like a lot of these places are kind of, I don't want to use the word destined. I use that loosely because I don't really like that word. But they are often kind of heading towards being incorporated into the country that they are currently locked within, because like it's really hard to maintain something like that.
Azerbaijan relinquished official governmental control over this region. However, it is still a huge breeding ground for fighting and conflict. To this day, Nagorno-Karabakh is kind of an independent nation that runs without Azeri legislation. However, the situation gets very complicated. As you'll soon find out, Armenia actually has a very unique and strategic location in a very dark and complex territory. But first, let's explain the terrain. Armenia's landscapes are actually pretty distinct and quite lovely. The land is almost completely mountainous with fast-flowing rivers and green forests, a lot of the farms being beautiful terrace farms on the hillsides. Armenia enjoys nice warm summers and long autumns and cold snowy winters. Environmentally and agriculture-wise, Armenia has been taking their land very seriously. Laws have just been passed that heavily tax people and companies for any kind of air, land, or water pollution. All tax revenue goes towards reinvesting in environmental protection activities. With fertile
I'm curious about this, like with landlocked countries and their relationship with their environment as opposed to non-landlocked countries. Because landlocked countries, in a lot of ways, they find themselves often dependent on the outer countries and dependent upon their cooperation and such. They don't have as easily a very strong trade system. Like it just doesn't come about as easily. So I'd imagine maintaining what you have within yourself would be more important for a landlocked country than one that had access to the ocean and therefore easier access to allied nations and stuff like that.
Volcanic soil, the land allows them to grow all sorts of fruits, vegetables, and grains, and a huge percentage, about 72% of the land, is used for agriculture, which employs about 46% of the workforce. Armenia went through a huge shift in their agriculture after disbanding from the former Soviet Union and becoming independent in 1991. Long story short, land privatization was established and people could freely grow and administer their own crops without fear of the state control and demand. There's actually a little bit of controversy though, because although Armenia has a huge potential for renewable energy sources like hydroelectric power and water power, they actually are more dependent on nuclear power with plants that were built during the Soviet rule. Problem is that these plants are built in earthquake-prone zones, which put them in a precarious position. But even with all this acknowledged, the government seems to favor investing in these sources of power more than alternative brands. Finally, if you
I mean, I understand the investment. A lot of people are skeptical about nuclear power, but it's incredibly efficient in a lot of ways. There is the potential for meltdown, and anytime somebody can say something pro-nuclear, there are plenty of examples that you can point to, like, oh, okay, that's bad. But like, also, it is good to firmly separate nuclear power in the energy field from the military field, because you can have the energy and not have like the military element. So you don't have to be all like, oh, that's spooky, oh no, they're gonna get a nuke and they're gonna bomb everyone around them. Not necessarily. There are plenty of places that don't like enrich uranium enough to create a a bomb and they just want it for their power grids and stuff like that, and I get that. That geographically though is complicated, so that might be one of the examples where I'm like, maybe you would have been better on like non-renewable energy than taking that sort of a risk. There's some places where, like, geographically, I understand there is a challenge there, and it might be even more of a risk to rely on nuclear energy. But there's also the element of they could do it, just not in those locations. But what are you going to do? Just pick up and move the plant? I'd imagine it's a little difficult to do that. I'm no nuke expert, but I'd imagine it's probably difficult to just kind of pick it up and move it around.
Ask any Armenian, they'll tell you that Mount Ararat, although kind of technically in Turkey right now, totally belongs to Armenia, and historically it kind of did belong to the Armenian Empire at one point. Mount Ararat actually plays a huge role in Armenian symbolism and nationalistic pride. To this day, Armenians can see the majestic mountain off in the distance from their borders. Speaking of nationalism, let's talk about the demographics.
Sick.
Armenia has about 3.3 million people and is very racially homogenous. About 97% of the population is Armenian, with very few minorities like Greeks, Russians, Georgians, and the intriguingly enigmatic Yazidi people. The interesting thing, though, is that more Armenian people, over twice as much as the entire population of Armenia, lives outside of Armenia. It's estimated about 8 million Armenians live in diaspora around the world, and the reason for this was primarily because of the Armenian genocide. Long story short, during the time of World War I, the Ottomans tried to ethnically cleanse the region during their last stretches of their falling empire and ended up killing over 1.5 million Armenians. This caused an influx of Armenians to leave Armenia out of fear, and to this day there are numerous Armenian communities spread throughout the world, most heavily in places like Russia, Iran, France, and the US, with the largest Armenian community in the US being right here in my hometown, Los Angeles. One of the
I know I've met a couple Armenians, and I found that so interesting. I know that the Armenian genocide, and I don't claim to know too much about everything that built up to the Armenian genocide and the culture around Armenians in relation to that, but I know that it's one of the underrated is a bad word. It's not talked about probably as much as it should be among other genocides and attempted genocides. I think the Armenian genocide is one that I hear about less than I should, given its undeniably large scale.
The most distinguishable aspects about Armenia, though, would have to be the language and the alphabet. Along with Georgia and Greece, Armenia is one of the only 3 European languages that uses an alphabet that is not derived from a Latin or Cyrillic-based writing system. The Armenian alphabet, or the Aibuben, has 38 letters.
So that looks familiar.
40 if you include those extra letters that were added during the 1920s. They even made a monument to the alphabet in 2005 in Burakan. There are also 2 distinct dialects, Eastern and Western Armenian, Western being spoken mostly by the Armenians in diaspora around the world. Sometimes it can also be hard for Western Armenian dialect speakers to understand Eastern dialect speakers without consistent practice or hearing it. Armenia also has a long history of Christianity, as historical accounts claim that 2 of Jesus' disciples, Thaddeus and Bartholomew, preached to the Armenians in the 1st century AD, and eventually Armenia became the first Christian state in the world at around 300 AD, just at the end of the persecution period during the Roman Empire. Finally,
That's actually fascinating. I didn't know that. As far as like Christian nations go, I mostly just think about when the Romans finally came around to Christianity, but I guess I never really thought about other nations being able to get to it first. I guess when I'm learning about that period, one of the only things I ever learned about was the Roman Empire. Not even a whole lot about them, but I feel like they dominate the historical narrative during that period so much that I guess I'm not that surprised that I don't know too much about what was going on in Armenia at the time, but it's still interesting.
Armenians have a huge love of wrestling and chess. In fact, when Armenia was under Soviet rule, the Soviets would specifically want to choose Armenian wrestlers because they always came back at a rate of 90% of the time with medals. Also, with some of the most worldwide renowned chess players, such as the famous Tigran Petrosyan and numerous world championship winners, Armenia is considered one of the strongest chess nations to this day. They love chess. You know what else Armenia loves? These countries we're about to discuss in the friend zone. I nailed that transition.
This is where we get to talk about Greece.
Here's a little story. When I was
where that comes around.
I was assigned a seat where I literally had to share a desk table facing and staring my worst enemies 2 feet away from me for the entire school year. And there was nothing I could do. It was torture.
I had that too.
That's kind of what Armenia is like. With this predicament, Armenia is located right next to Azerbaijan and Turkey, the two countries they get along with least. Azerbaijan because of the whole Nagorno-Karabakh conflict, and Turkey because of the former oppression that the Ottoman Empire had put on them. To this day, the land borders are closed between the two countries, and Azerbaijan even prosecutes anyone that tries to enter with an Armenian passport. One of the biggest reasons why things don't get insane, though, is because a little friend Armenia has named Russia. You may have heard of him. As a former Soviet state, Armenia has a lot of ties to Russia. However, after the breakup of the Soviet Union, they actually decided to maintain friendly relations with Russia, and Russia has been very dedicated to the protection of Armenia. They even have a Russian military base located in Gyumri. This gives Armenia significant backup should anything cataclysmic arise. They also have close and strategic ties to Iran in the south, as they are Armenia's only open land border to Asia. Despite the religious difference,
I mean, with the Russia thing, there still are imperialist tendencies in Russia. That might be an understatement there. So, like, even if you aren't directly controlling a place, if they are somewhat dependent upon you, you still have, like, an incredible influence there. So, even if we're going from, like, if we take the more cynical route, and this isn't just out of the goodness of their hearts, I suppose there's plenty of good explanations why they would want to maintain Armenia's safety, and they are still powerful enough that they can throw their weight around a little bit, and just kind of the specter of Russia could prevent a lot of conflict.
The two get along just fine and share a long cultural history that goes back thousands of years. Georgians and Armenians have been sisters since day one and share a heavy history and culture with each other as well. They love each other, however, there's a little bit of drama because Armenia is still friends with Russia, who recently went to war with Georgia over the South Ossetia region. This puts a huge economic strain on Armenia because Georgia was the only land access route that Armenia had to Europe. And after the war, Russia put a blockade on Georgia. Apparently, Armenia's two good friends don't get along. However, on a side note, when it comes to Greece, Armenia and Greece, they kind of really like each other. Like, they really kind of like each other. Greece and Armenia just get along really well. Armenians are welcoming Greece with open arms, and likewise Greeks in Armenia. It's like, hey, you have an Orthodox Christian upbringing?
Oh, so that, yeah.
Hey, you have a distinct, unique language that isn't based on any Indo-European dialect? So do I. Hey, you were persecuted and you hate the Ottomans too? So do I. Hey, would you?
I guess there's more in common than I would have thought. I guess being so heavily Christian in that particular region, it is probably a nice uniter there. I think that's probably a huge element there. Yeah, that's actually quite fascinating. Armenia is one of those places that I've always heard about so much. But I never really learned all that much of substance except about the Armenian genocide. I would say I didn't really learn as much as I would have liked about, but geographically, they're actually really interesting.
I don't know, just like to maybe get some coffee sometime. To this day, it's not very uncommon to find lots of couples and families that have one Armenian parent and one Greek parent. It's like a match made in southeastern European heaven. In the end, Armenia is kind of like...
I want to get to Greece. That's
There's a lot of drama, there's some relationship problems, there's cute people pairing up, but in the end, they're honest with who they are, and they trudge on through life one step at a time. Stay tuned, Australia is coming up next.
And we're gonna do that one now, I guess. Hold on. I'm not good at this yet. Where's my mouse? I just lost my mouse off screen. So then if I were to do this in like a live stream format, I would go to my screen and then I'd talk to the chat or something, right? That's what the live streamers are supposed to do. And then Okay, I'm gonna have to pull up the Australia video. Hold on, just one.
All right.
There we go. Stop talking, dude. I haven't pulled it back up. I actually had no reason to pull it off screen before. I could have just gone to the next video. My bad. I'm still not sure how I want to format these things. I don't know if I would want to go to the full screen just as a formality, just to talk to you guys. We'll figure out what's good. I'll figure out what's good. Whatever. So now we're going to be doing Australia. So we're going to a very European nation in culture and such, but not as much geographically. Very geographically unique, I guess, to the point where we disagree as to whether or not it's a continent sometimes. So that's fun. So Australia, I think that one's going to be fascinating. Let's get this one started and see what we got.
Hey everybody, let's just all get it off of our chests. Koalas and kangaroos, boomerangs, didgeridoos, Sydney, Melbourne, Boomeroo, crocodiles, cockatoos, everything that will kill you. Shrimp on Barbies, that's not true. That Vegemite stuff that tastes like poo. Coral reefs and platypuses, platypi. What's the plural of platypus? All right, now let's actually learn about the freaking country.
One of the things that I find so fascinating about Australia is cockatoos. You ever see it? Like I got this thing, and he's a parrot. He's got a tough beak, despite his size. But then I think of cockatoos. Those things are monsters. They're so loud. Their bite can like really mess you up, and they're just flying around like whatever. They're like exotic over here, and if you have one as a pet, you're an insane person. The fact that they're just flying around over there is just insane to me, because they just don't feel real in a lot of ways. So the more we can talk about cockatoos in this video, the better.
It's time to learn geography.
No!
Hey everybody, I'm your host Paul Barbato. Today's gonna be Australia.
Ollie B.
You know the drill. Let's dissect the flag.
Yeah, I'm curious about this one.
Australia.
Because I know it's got the Union Jack, but like the stars or something, I don't really get. I'm curious
The
about
flag
that
is a
part.
blue field with a Union Jack on the upper hoist corner to represent that it was a former colony and a current Commonwealth of the United Kingdom, with a large star under it representing the Commonwealth, and the 5 stars on the right, the Alpha, Beta, Gamma, Delta, Epsilon, Crucis, to the right representing the Southern Cross constellation. All right, that was fun. Now let's...
I feel like Australia culturally, while they are still so attached to the United Kingdom in a lot of ways, I would love to see what they would do if they designed a new flag. Like, one that is really just looking inward a little bit more culturally rather than outward into their history, but just kind of capture what they are now. And there's plenty of jokes to be made about that. Like, oh, what kind of a nightmare would that be? But, like, really, it is a fascinating place. And when it comes to mind, the flag doesn't really, I think, do its uniqueness justice. And that has always kind of bugged me. If they like the flag, that's fine. I just like to imagine what an alternate universe Australia flag would look like.
Let's discuss about the borders. Now, obviously, as an island nation, or rather large one, but still an island, Australia doesn't have any borders with any other nations, but that doesn't mean that Australia doesn't have some rather intriguing parameters. The country...
We have talked about Australia in the context of continents, and depending on where you are, who you're learning from or whatever, continents can be broken up in different ways, because continents in a lot of ways, unless you're talking about tectonic plates and stuff, continents are a very human-made concept in the way that we divide up countries. Like, in a lot of ways, Europe doesn't really make sense as a continent from a physical geography standpoint, but culturally, we kind of get what Europe is. Australia falls in a very interesting position where some places will teach that it's a continent, some teach that it's just part of the oceanic nations. It's kind of the big question of, like, how big do you have to be to really be a continent? Like, it's a really, really big island. To the point where, like, where does the island end and where does it become a continent? I don't know. And like I said, different people have different answers to the question. Really, it's one of those questions where there's no right answer. It's just we divided the world up in different ways to make it easier to understand. So it doesn't really matter as long as we can kind of contextualize Australia properly in whatever way we decide to break up the world. As long as we
divides itself up in a rather intriguing way. Like the US, Australia has states, not provinces. There is a difference. 6 of them, and each one kind of has their own little flair and quirks, like Tasmania, known for being crazy. What's a little interesting, though, are the territories. Australia has 3 domestic internal territories and 6 overseas territories. Technically 7 if you include the Australian Antarctic Territory, even though the Antarctic Treaty kind of bans anybody from claiming Antarctic soil as their own, which we will find out in future episodes that a lot of countries do a wonderful job at ignoring. The 3 internal territories are Northern Territory.
Yeah, they are in a pretty good place to claim Antarctic territory, but yeah, you're technically not supposed to do that. It's supposed to be this sort of neutral territory. It's one of those cases where we're not really fighting too hard over it yet, but it has a lot of natural resources. So we might be fighting over it more in the future. So a lot of countries want to have a little bit of leverage when those fights actually begin. Hopefully they're not like literal fights and they're more figurative fights, but we'll see.
Capital Territory, which is basically just the capital city of Canberra and some extra space around it, and the confusing little tyke Jervis Bay Territory. Jervis Bay was bought and developed to give the inland capital Canberra access to the sea, and eventually Jervis Bay split from the capital. However, it's still counted as part of the capital in elections. It's a little confusing. Even though it really doesn't have much going for it, except for a small Navy base and beaches that it kind of took from other neighboring towns. The most dramatic border area, though, would have to be the middle of Australia. For years, this slab of land didn't exactly quite know how to distinguish itself and has gone through 4 transitions in the past century. First, it was all South Australia, which didn't quite make sense because parts of it touched the northern parts of Australia, so it split into 2. One state.
Central Australia. Just call it Central Australia. Like, what are we doing?
Then for 4 years, it became South Australia and 2 territories, the new one being called Central Australian Territory. Then finally it changed its mind and went back to being Northern Territory. Central Australia is kind of like your girlfriend at a restaurant. What do you want? What do you want? It's not that simple! Finally, we reach the overseas territories. Although Australia has over 8,000 islands under its sovereignty, 6 of these islands operate as distinct territories, some of which sustain themselves with permanent populations. They are Ashmore and Cartier, the Cocos or Keelings Islands, Coral Sea Islands, the Heard and McDonald Islands, and the popular holiday spot, Norfolk Island, and the pleasant Christmas Island that gets attacked by huge coconut crabs every year. Finally,
oh, those are so cool. I've seen those things. They're amazing.
Christmas Island that gets attacked by huge coconut crabs.
I don't know much about Christmas Island, though I've seen, I think it has like its own flag that somehow I came across, but I'm not sure. Oh, those things are so rad.
Crabs every year. Finally, Australia is home to arguably the most micronations in the world. Places like the Principality of Wye, Rainbow Creek, the Empire of Atlantium, and more. These nations were developed by either small groups of people or a single person because they were
I don't know what that is.
Protesting taxes and wanted to claim autonomy, or they were just kind of bored and decided to amuse themselves. But still, hey, they tried. All right,
Atlantium.
Now let's talk about the landscape.
Sounds sick.
Okay, not all of Australia is a desert, okay? Only about 35%. Okay, so besides Antarctica, Australia is the driest continent on the planet, which explains why, yes, 85% of the population lives along the edges of the country within 50 kilometers of the coast. Nonetheless, a lot of places, specifically...
I mean, I don't know about it specifically in the case of Australia, but in other countries that were colonized, a lot of settlements pop up near the coasts, and that's where often a lot of cities will end up being, because that's just one of the easier. It's the first place you get to when you settle there. So you settle down and you create a community there, and historically those communities are more likely to grow bigger than a lot of the others because they've been around longer. They have a lot of access to resources and stuff, being close to the water. So there's a lot of benefit to that, and you'll find often when I'm playing GeoGuessr, I'll find that there's a lot of concentration of like larger cities and stuff just towards the coast in a lot of places. And then you'll find these like vast bits of land where you won't see a whole lot settled in there. So it's really cool.
Around the coasts actually have very temperate and even tropical landscapes. By the north, you find tropical zones and wetlands and rainforests. By the far edges on the east and west, you can find subtropical zones with lighter forests and plains. A little bit inland, close to the interior, you find grasslands and flat stretches of semi-arid terrain. In the southeast by Sydney, you find temperate, cooler, arid land with semi-tropical, yet slightly dry areas with an abundance of trees and plants. Then, of course, you have Tasmania, which is on a completely different level of green. Then we reach the deep interior where we hit the Great Deserts like the Great Victoria and the Great Sandy Deserts. This area is famously known as the Outback.
And it's weird that that's what everybody here thinks about when they think of Australia. Like, there's not a lot of people there. There's not a lot going. Maybe it's like animal life that draws us to Australia in a lot of ways. Americans think of Australia probably in the same way that they think of Africa. A lot of the times it's associated with the wildlife more than perhaps like city life, because that's not as exotic to Americans. I can only assume that's why. Like in Africa, we don't think about African cities or anything like that. We like to think of like Lion King, essentially, which is a very narrow view, but it's an unfortunate reality of how a lot of people view a lot of these places.
The Outback is essentially the area of Australia with long open stretches of red and orange desert that lays out beyond the horizon with few sparse populations of people that can be found anywhere. It has a dry,
really
rocky,
cool,
rugged terrain that everybody assumes is teeming with a variety of poisonous insects and reptiles, and, well, I mean, it kind of is, but still, there's more to it than just that.
Terrifying.
And don't forget Lake Hillier, that strange lake that's mysteriously naturally pink for some strange reason that baffles scientists. Now, if there's one thing that really...
They don't know?
Australia, it would have to be its world-renowned beaches and coasts. People flock from all over the world just to enjoy the beautiful, pristine atmosphere of a real, authentic Australian beach. Just remember to put on your sunscreen, though. Australians actually kind of have a joke where they can tell who the ignorant tourists are. It's usually the ones who think they'll be totally fine sitting out in the sun for more than 20 minutes. Skin cancer rates are actually exceptionally high in Australia, and the population has acknowledged the precautions that they need to take. Now, we all know that
Wait, what the hell?
Actually,
was
exceptionally
that?
high in Australia, and the population has acknowledged.
It's just a giant chicken. Why is there a giant chicken on the beach?
The precautions that they need to take. Now, we all know that Australia is home to some of the most unique and curiously distinct animal species in the world not found anywhere else. However, Australia is also known as the home of many feral species. Australia has over 50 invasive species that were brought over to the land from areas mostly in Europe, and over the course of nearly 1.5 centuries have spread like wildfire all over the country. Animals like the European rabbit, red fox, water buffaloes, goats, pigs, even camels, and worst of all, this cane toad. They've all gone wild and have cost the Australian government billions of dollars in environmental damages and maintenance. Yeah, I don't really know how to transition into the demographics from this part, so
The unique nature of... Oh, plane's going overhead, sorry. The unique nature of the animals, it's gotta be because they developed, like, environmentally developed so much independently of all the other continents, since they are really their own thing, their own maybe continent, maybe just really big island. I guess, yeah, one of the only resemblances you would find are from what is brought over, and I guess that's what makes it so incredibly unique. Why they all had to be so scary, I don't know. That's probably a much bigger question there.
Here's demographics.
I love demographics.
Today, Australia has a population of about 23 million people. Now, to many outsiders, Australia is kind of known as the place where the British sent their prisoners. First of all, that's rude.
Yeah.
Second of all, that's only, like, kind of half true. Yes, during the early years of Australia...
Yeah, that's... I think the first time I ever learned about Australia as a kid, that was the first thing I learned about it. That it was a prison colony. That it was, and we just have this image in our head of a bunch of burglars coming together and building this massive country together, where they're all just inherently criminals on the inside, which is a very ignorant thought, but it's how I learned about Australia when I was pretty little.
Australia's colonization from the UK, droves of convicts were sent to penal colonies in Botany Bay, which is now in present-day Sydney. Over 165,000 convicts, about 25,000 of which were women, were sent over the course of 80 years. Although the British weren't the first ones to discover Australia, it was actually the Dutch, as they came to
it's the Dutch.
Holland and the adjacent island next door, New Zealand, after the province of Zeeland in the Netherlands. However, as we'll see,
the Dutch were really good at colonizing things and not keeping it very long from the British, weren't they? Yeah. When it comes to when it comes to colonization or first discovery from like a European perspective, it's the Dutch or the Vikings will often be like, nope, actually we were here first. A lot of them will subvert your expectations in a lot of ways, and then there's your typical typical names like the Spanish and the Portuguese and whatever, like those not as surprising names that didn't get left behind as much in people's collective memory.
Soon discovered the Dutch were really good at discovering places, but kind of not so good at colonizing and maintaining those places for themselves. However, most of Australia's population came from natural colonization from British non-convict nationals. Some would argue that Australia was kind of like the UK's version of Operation Backup Plan in case of America goes crazy. After the American Revolution, the UK tried to compensate for lost colonies by
That might be a little too
ones, and Australia
specific,
was
but I got it.
on the list. About 85% of the population is European. Asians make up the next largest minority of about 12%, mostly coming from China and India and other Southeast Asian countries like.
Yeah, it would be really Asian, right? Like, because geographically, it is so close to these very ethnically Asian or Asian-ish, or like in that vague area. It's not really surprising there. Some of the places where the people would appear Asian and maybe not be specifically Asian, depending on how you break down the continents, because they would also be considered like island nations, not part of Asia specifically. But you know, let's not break our brains thinking about that, because mine can only think so hard.
Like Vietnam and the Philippines. And by the way, yes, Australia does have black people, not many, but before the Federation began, Africans, mostly from sub-Saharan countries like South Africa, Mauritius, Zimbabwe, and Sudan, have historically resided in Australia. It wasn't until the 60s when African assistance programs allowed many Africans to study and eventually move to Australia. And today, they make up about 1% of the population. One demographic of people that commonly gets overlooked, though, would have to be the native Australians, commonly known as the Aborigines, which make up about 3% of the population. Aborigines are a very unique and distinct people group that come from hundreds of different tribes, each with their own language and dialect, spread throughout the north, south, and central regions. Today, Aboriginal rights are a huge hot-button topic in Australian legislation, and about 22% of the land of northern Australia is Aboriginal owned.
Oh, I like that flag. I like that a lot. I mean, I've looked at a lot of flags in this series so far. For some reason, I really like that. I like how the yellow breaks up the black and red. Like, it would have, if it was just the black and red, it would look like the evil villain flag, because that's often what the black and red flag looks like. In whatever form, it's what you do when you want to look evil. But the yellow actually makes it look a little bit more welcoming. Yeah. I'll continue before my words start to break again.
In 2013, Aboriginal groups actually banded together and decided to kind of make their own little state called the Murawari Republic, independent from Australia. The Australian government, though, doesn't really recognize this claim and just kind of brushes it off with a meh, as long as you don't cause a civil war attitude. As you can see, a lot of people have...
I like that flag too.
But now let's see
it's
how
a really good
Australia
flags.
with the rest of the world. Australia is, let's just put it very simply, a very popular country. If this was high school, Australia would be on the top of the social ladder, hands down. Everybody knows something about Australia. When it comes to friends, though, Australia not only goes for the cool kids, but also the strategic ones. Of course, Australia gets along with many of its Asian neighbor nations, specifically China and India, as large numbers of people from those nations live in Australia, and they do great business with them as well. Australia gets along pretty well with the islands of Oceania, except Fiji. In 2006, Australia...
I believe America is going to be on this list, right? I believe we have a relatively good relationship with Australia. I guess we'll see.
refused to back up a military coup that overthrew the government in Fiji, and since then, things have been a little weird between the two countries. In terms of their best friends, though, of course, New Zealand would have to rank in the top level, and they are basically like siblings that share a very similar culture, language,
Similar flag.
and histories as former colonies, whereas the UK also has a high priority on Australia's entourage as they make up the largest demographic of people ethnically and
I mean, if they weren't cool with the UK, their flag probably wouldn't have stayed the same way it is. Like, I think having the Union Jack on their flag kind of indicates at least a cordial relationship or at least a kind of reverence for their history as a colony, even if they do desire their own distinct identity. Like, if they really did have a problem, it wouldn't still be there.
as migrants in the country. But finally, we reach the USA. The USA and Australia kind of have a little crush on each other. Australia is always there to back up the
feel
US
it.
in times when allies are necessary, and the US, well, I mean, we Americans, we just love Australians. We love their accents, we love their culture, we love their accents, we love their spunky Australian attitude, and we love their sexy, sexy accents. Almost any Australian that comes
I agree.
is immediately loved and welcome, even if they are slightly sociopathic. One sentence with that accent and we are smitten. We love you, Australia. In conclusion, Australia...
Indeed. I have been fascinated by Australia since I was little. It started with like kind of the wild card element because I think that they're all. At first I started thinking like, oh, they're all criminals. That must be really interesting. And what a weird place to have your first impression of a place. But like Australia is incredibly fascinating. One of the more. I learned this a couple years ago that Australia has rednecks. I think there's another word for it, but you know how America is known for. They're rednecks and they're like America, and you know specifically the America, no A, just like a comma, America. Well, apparently Australians have that as well, and they have their own thing they say where they're like Straya. I don't know how to say it actually in an Australian accent, but how much more in common could we have? I think we have a lot of the same crazy. But we also kind of look, as Americans, kind of look at Australia like we have a lot of crazy in common, but they might be a little crazier than us, and we kind of respect that. I don't know. It really comes down often to our view of their wildlife, I think, because I really do think that's one of the most fascinating things. Americans will love the idea of Australia. It's so foreign. It's so new. It feels like this untapped land, even though it's really, in a lot of ways, similar to the United States. I don't know what it is. There also might be something that's just generally intangible that's hard to put our finger on about Australia. I think it has a national charisma to it.
Australia is just... Everybody loves Australia. Stay tuned. Austria is coming up next.
Ooh, Austria. Not everybody loves Austria, right? I'm pretty sure they'll have more enemies than Australia because Australia was too popular here. Do we want to do Austria? I did it wrong.
All right,
sorry.
let's just...
I wanted to see how long this was. Austria. It's 10 minutes. Should we do it? We'd be... Nah. Oh, wait, Austria. So not Azerbaijan. So we'll do Austria and Azerbaijan next time. And that would be able to, then we'd be able to wrap up the A's. Yeah, that sounds like a good idea. I was thinking like, should we do just a little more? No. We'll call it for today. I'll see if the footage is all good for this one. Because, you know, when I try new things are subject to go wrong. So I don't want to do too much and then have everything fall apart on me. It would be a real pain. So we'll be back in the very near future with Austria. If you like the idea of doing multiple videos in one video, let me know. As we start transitioning into something that is more streaming friendly, I think that'll be really cool. I would like to spend like an afternoon just watching Geography Now stuff and just kind of talking with you guys. I think that would be really cool. Right now, my setup's not fully equipped for that, but I'm taking little baby steps into making sure that I will be all set to do that when I am more equipped to do so. And then I'll be able to get a bunch of videos done in like one, well, the equivalent of a bunch of videos done in like one shot. And then I'd have more time to spend on some different stuff for the channel because I have so much other stuff I want to do. It's just, I also want to maintain what I'm currently doing. So it's hard. I don't know. So I hope, let me pop myself back on there. Oh, that's so fun. It's the littlest differences for me that are so fun to me. So thank you guys for watching, and I will see you in the very near future with another video. I've been a little bit more busy lately, and I've been taking more days off, but don't worry, I will continue to come back. Don't you trip. So I will see you in the very near future with another video. Bye.